There is someone who is absolutely consumed by a feeling for you, and the reason behind it will likely unsettle you much more than it flatters you. That is because it has almost nothing to do with who you actually are. Instead, it has everything to do with something you accidentally awakened deep within them. Once you see this, you will never be able to unsee it. You have likely spent your life believing that love is something built on simple foundations like shared attraction, common values, or perhaps just good timing. That is a comforting belief, but comfort is often just a lie that the mind tells itself to avoid looking at something far darker and more complicated. The truth is that real, obsessive, and almost irrational love is born in the dark waters of the unconscious, not in the clear light of logic. Without ever intending to, you stepped into a part of their psyche that they have been actively hiding from themselves for years. Here is the reality of the situation. You did not just make them feel good, you made them feel truly seen in a way that terrified them to their very core. This is exactly where it starts to get dangerous for both of you. When someone feels seen at that level of depth, they do not just admire you. They attach themselves to you violently and completely. Most people fail to notice this dynamic. They operate under the assumption that being loved simply means being liked by someone. But what is happening in this case is something far more intense and much more profound. You triggered a deep recognition. It was a recognition of something long buried, something deeply repressed, and something they were never actually supposed to confront in their daily life. Somehow, you became the mirror. You did not do this by trying, by performing, or by crafting a specific image. You did it simply by being something they did not expect, something they could not control, and something they were entirely unable to categorize. That moment of realization effectively broke their internal structure. For a long time, their mind was carefully built to protect them, to keep certain desires hidden away, to suppress specific needs, and to deny particular truths about who they are. But then you appeared, and all of a sudden, those walls simply did not hold anymore. This is where it gets even darker, because what they feel for you is not clean or simple. It is not even fully conscious. It is a complex, churning mixture of intense longing, deep-seated fear, psychological projection, and something that is dangerously close to an obsession. You did not just attract them, you completely disrupted them. And in the language of the unconscious mind, that kind of disruption feels exactly like destiny. But here is the part you have not realized yet. You did not do anything obvious. You did not say something perfect, and you certainly did not follow a script or a formula. You simply violated an expectation they had for the world. That is exactly what hooked them. The human psyche is inherently addicted to predictable patterns and becomes completely destabilized by the slightest bit of unpredictability. You became unpredictable in a way that felt deeply meaningful to them. It did not feel chaotic or random. It felt symbolically charged, as if you represented something far greater than just a person. That is when the projection began. They started seeing you not as an individual, but as a long-awaited answer. They saw you as the answer to a question they never consciously dared to ask themselves. You became the answer to a hollow void they did not even know how to name. Once that internal process occurs, they no longer just fall in love with you, they fall into you. This is why it becomes nearly impossible for them to ever truly detach. Because if they were to detach from you, it would mean finally confronting that hidden part of themselves that you originally awakened. That is something the mind resists with every ounce of its energy. Instead, they choose to hold on to you, even when it confuses them, even when it hurts them, and even when it makes absolutely no rational sense. Here is the truth that will likely make you feel uneasy. You did not just awaken something beautiful. You also awakened something inherently unstable. Repressed desires do not tend to emerge gently. They erupt. They distort how a person perceives the world around them. They blur the lines of healthy boundaries, and they create an emotional intensity that feels like the ultimate truth, even when it is not actually grounded in reality. You can feel that intensity, can you not? It is present in the way they look at you when they think you are not paying attention. It is in the subtle, nervous tension during every interaction. You can feel that something much deeper is happening underneath the surface, even when the two of you are sitting in total silence. What makes this even more complicated is that they do not fully understand what is happening either. This is not taking place in the logical, conscious part of their mind. It is happening far beneath that, in the dark corners where logic simply does not exist. It is a place where deep contradictions coexist, and where love and fear become entirely indistinguishable from one another. That is exactly why their behavior feels so inconsistent. One moment, they seem completely drawn to you, unable to look away. The next moment, they pull back and create distance. They do not do this because their feelings have changed. They do it because their internal defenses have suddenly activated. Something deep inside them whispered that this is dangerous and that it is exposing something they are not ready to face. This creates an exhausting, unending loop. It is a cycle of unconscious push and pull. There is intense desire followed immediately by overwhelming fear. There is profound closeness followed by a sudden need for distance. There is high-octane intensity followed by complete confusion. And the truth is, you are caught in this loop whether you realize it or not. A part of you feels it too, that strange sensation that this connection is somehow different from anything you have known. It feels heavier and more highly charged. It feels as though it is pulling something out of you as well. The real question is what you actually did to trigger something this powerful. It was not a matter of random chance. It was not just luck, and it certainly was not an accident. There was a specific moment in time where something within them shifted. There was a moment where something deep inside them recognized you, and once that recognition took hold, there was no going back to the way things were before. Most people fail to understand that this recognition had nothing to do with who you are on the surface. It was entirely about what you represent in their unconscious mind. You represent something they have been searching for, something they have been desperately avoiding, and something they have been needing all at the same time. Until you truly understand what that is, you will never understand why they cannot let you go. You will not understand why this connection feels so intense, so confusing, and so impossible to define with words. The truth is that you did not just make them fall in love with you. You activated a part of them that they have been suppressing for years. Once something like that wakes up, it does not simply go back to sleep. It waits in the shadows. It grows. It demands attention. And eventually, it forces a real confrontation. The only remaining question is whether they will have the strength to face it when the time comes, or if they will lose themselves entirely in a desperate attempt to escape it. For a long time, they told themselves it was nothing. They insisted it was just a passing feeling, a temporary fascination, or something that would surely fade if they just gave it a little bit of time. But time did not dissolve it. Time only fed it. Because what they are experiencing is not built on surface-level attraction. It is firmly rooted in something far older and buried much deeper within the unconscious. The unconscious mind never forgets. It simply waits, watches, and collects all the fragments of unresolved desires, storing them away in silence until the right person arrives to force them back into the light of awareness. Somehow, that someone became you. You did not enter their life as an ordinary person. You entered it as a psychological trigger, a key, and a symbol that unlocked something they spent years trying not to feel. This is where it gets truly dangerous. Once the unconscious is activated, it does not ask for your permission. It simply takes control. It does so quietly, subtly, but completely. Most people never see this coming. They assume that obsession looks obvious, that it involves constant messages, desperate actions, or overwhelming displays of intensity. But real, deep-seated obsession hides behind restraint. It hides behind long stretches of silence and the carefully maintained illusion of control. The deeper the feeling, the more the psyche fights to suppress it. And as we know, suppression only makes the feeling grow stronger. So, what do they do instead? They analyze you. They overthink every single interaction you have ever shared. They replay old conversations in their mind like a broken record that refuses to stop. They do not do this because they want to. They do it because they have no other choice, because you have become inextricably tied to something unresolved within them. You are tied to something unfinished. And in the world of human psychology, unfinished patterns are the most powerful forces that exist. The intensity you feel from them is not just about you. It is entirely about what you represent to their past. In the strange language of the unconscious, people do not truly fall in love with individuals. They fall in love with symbols. You became a symbol of something they lost, something they never had, or something they were taught they did not deserve. This is why it becomes almost unbearable for them. Loving you forces them to confront a massive contradiction, a deep split within their own identity. Part of them wants to move closer to you, to bridge the gap, but another part of them resists with equal force. This is not because they do not care about you. It is because caring about you exposes the very thing they have been avoiding their entire lives. This is where it gets even darker. That internal conflict does not stay contained inside their head. It leaks out into their behavior. It shows up in their hesitation, their mixed signals, and those moments of intense, soul-bearing closeness followed immediately by unexplained, cold distance. You feel that, don't you? You feel that emotional whiplash, that strange sense that something is pulling them toward you while something else is physically pushing them away. But here is the truth of the matter. They are not actually confused about who you are. They are completely overwhelmed by the war happening within themselves. You have activated a part of them that does not follow the laws of logic. It operates entirely on raw emotion, long-buried memories, and suppressed desires. It is a part of them that remembers things they thought they had consciously forgotten. Once that part is awake, it starts asking questions they simply cannot answer. It asks why this feels so hauntingly familiar. It asks why this scares them more than anything else ever has. It asks why they feel an absolute desperate need for you while simultaneously wanting to run as far away as possible. This is where their mind begins to fracture. It does not happen visibly or dramatically, but internally in the quiet spaces of their mind. The conscious mind wants stability and safety, but the unconscious mind craves finality and resolution, and very often true resolution requires a bit of chaos. So, what happens next? They start to create more distance. They start to pull back. They do not do this because they want to lose you, and they certainly do not do it because they stopped caring. They do it because they are desperately trying to regain some sense of control. They convince themselves that stepping back will finally quiet the noise of their own feelings. They believe that if they just put enough space between the two of you, that the part of them you awakened will go back to sleep. But they are wrong. You are the mirror, you are the trigger, and you are the shift they were never prepared for. The more they try to pull away, the more they are forced to confront the reality that you are already an inseparable part of their internal world. They often believe that creating space will bring them the clarity they need. They tell themselves that time will weaken the attachment they feel towards you. However, the hard truth is that distance does not kill an unconscious attachment. In reality, it only intensifies it, because absence removes the grounding effect of reality and replaces it with the untamed power of the imagination. And imagination is exactly where obsession begins to thrive. Now, you are no longer just a person living your life. You have transformed into an image, a symbol, and a reflection of everything they cannot fully understand. Projections are incredibly powerful precisely because they do not have any limits. They grow, they evolve, and over time, they become more perfect, more deeply meaningful, and more absolutely necessary to the person feeling them. This is exactly where it becomes nearly impossible for them to break free. They are no longer attached to who you are as a human being. They are attached to what you have become in the landscape of their mind. and what you have become is something they cannot easily replace with anyone else. What makes this dynamic even more intense is that they do not trust the experience. They do not trust the strength of what they feel. They do not trust how quickly it all happened, and they do not trust how deeply you affect them. Deep down, their psyche knows that anything this powerful must carry a high cost. So, it creates intense resistance, doubt, and fear. This is not meant to destroy the feeling, but rather to protect them from what that feeling might eventually demand from them. If they were to fully accept what they feel for you, they would have to face everything they have been avoiding. They would have to look at every suppressed desire, every unresolved wound, and every hidden truth they have carried for years. That is not something the mind ever does willingly. Instead, they stay caught in the middle. They are pulled in two completely opposite directions. They want you, but they resist you. They spend hours thinking about you, but they actively avoid you. They feel everything, but they express almost nothing at all. This creates a tension that simply does not go away. It builds slowly and quietly until it reaches a breaking point where something has to give. The question that should truly disturb you is what happens when that tension becomes too much to contain. Because it will. It always does. The human psyche is not designed to hold that level of contradiction forever. Eventually, it has to break. But when it finally breaks, it does not always happen in a way you might expect. Sometimes it leads to a total confession. Sometimes it leads to a complete withdrawal. Other times, it results in actions that seem irrational or even self-destructive. When the unconscious mind takes over, logic becomes irrelevant, and pure emotion becomes the only law. That is the exact moment everything changes. It is the moment when they can no longer pretend this is just a passing feeling. It is the moment where they have to face exactly what this is. But understand this, that moment is coming whether they are ready for it or not. What you triggered in them is not temporary. It is not something on the surface, and it is certainly not something they can simply ignore. It is a force that demands a resolution, and resolution always comes at a price. The only real question is what they are willing to lose in order to avoid facing the reality of their feelings for you. At some point, the mind stops negotiating. Suppression has its limits, and what they feel for you has already crossed that line. You can feel it in the heavy silence between your interactions. That suffocating, heavy tension never really disappears. It just waits. The situation inside them is no longer stable. It is building pressure, and pressure within the human mind always looks for a way to be released. Here is the truth. That release does not always come as a moment of clarity. Sometimes it comes as a total collapse. This is where the experience becomes almost unbearable for them. It is no longer about simple attraction or basic curiosity. It is about a full-scale confrontation. It is a confrontation with the parts of themselves they have spent years avoiding. These are parts shaped by old wounds, past rejections, and long-held beliefs that whispered they were never enough, that they were too much, or that they were inherently unsafe to love. Then, you appeared. And without even trying, you contradicted every single one of those negative beliefs. The problem is that the psyche does not accept that kind of contradiction easily. It resists, it fights, and it distorts reality. Accepting you would mean rewriting everything they believe about their own worth. That is not a gentle process. It is a violent process, internally violent. So, instead of integrating those feelings, they fracture around them. One part of them moves toward you, craving the connection, the intensity, and the feeling of finally being seen. But another part pulls back with equal force, whispering warnings they do not fully understand. They tell themselves that this is not safe, that this will hurt them, or that this will expose them. This is where it gets even darker. The closer they feel to you, the more exposed they feel within their own soul. To the unconscious mind, that kind of exposure feels like a threat. It is not just an emotional threat, it is an existential one. You are not just someone they like, You have become a threat to the rigid internal structure they built just to survive. Survival identities do not dissolve easily. They defend themselves aggressively, suddenly, and sometimes even destructively. So, what do? They start creating elaborate narratives and stories to explain why this connection is not what it feels like. They tell themselves that it is just temporary, that it is not real, or that they are just overthinking things. The truth is that they are not trying to understand it. They are trying to contain it. They know that fully understanding it would mean admitting something they are not prepared to face, that this experience is real, and that it is deeper than anything they have ever felt before. But this is where the tension becomes nearly impossible to endure. No matter how much they try to rationalize it, their body and their subconscious simply do not listen. That pull toward you does not weaken. It intensifies, quietly and relentlessly, as if something deep inside them is insisting that this matters, that this is important, and that this cannot be ignored. Ignoring it starts to cost them. It costs them emotionally, mentally, and even physically, because unexpressed emotion never just disappears. It transforms. It turns into restlessness, into anxiety, and into that constant gnawing feeling that something is missing, even when everything else in their life seems to be fine. You become the center of that feeling, not because they consciously want you to be, but because their psyche has linked you to something essential, something they know they cannot replace. This is where their facade begins to slip. There are small cracks at first. There are moments where their control falters, where they almost say something, almost reveal something, or almost let you see just how deep this really goes. But then, they pull back even harder than before. They are now terrified of themselves, scared of how much they feel, and frightened by how little control they actually have over their own reactions. This creates a cycle that becomes increasingly unstable. The closer they get to you, the more they panic. The more they pull away, the stronger the feeling grows. Eventually, this cycle starts to break them from the inside. They might still appear composed, functional, and in control on the outside, but internally, there is absolute chaos because you have created a psychological paradox they cannot solve. They want you, but wanting you threatens their safety. They feel connected to you, but connection requires a level of vulnerability their defenses were built to avoid. They are now stuck between desire and fear, between truth and denial, and between moving forward and running away. Most people never realize that this is not just emotional tension, it is a fundamental identity tension. If they move toward you, they have to become someone new. They have to become someone more open, more exposed, and more honest. That version of themselves feels unfamiliar, unstable, and even dangerous. However, if they move away from you, they do not escape the feeling. They carry it with them everywhere they go. It follows them quietly and constantly, turning into regret, into deep longing, and into that persistent, haunting question of what might have happened if they had let something real happen. That single question is what begins to break them. There is no longer a safe option, only two very painful choices. They must either face what they feel or spend the rest of their time trying in vain to forget it. Forgetting is not as easy as they hoped. You are no longer just a memory. You have become embedded in their unconscious mind as a symbol, a trigger, and a constant reminder of something they cannot fully name. The more they try to suppress it, the more it resurfaces in their dreams, in their random thoughts, and in those moments of silence where everything else fades away and you are all that remains. This is where the pressure reaches its peak. The psyche can only endure so much internal contradiction before it demands a total resolution. Resolution does not always come gently. Sometimes it comes as a breaking point. It is a moment where everything they have been holding back finally spills out. It becomes uncontrolled, unfiltered, and unavoidable. The question that lingers right before that moment is what happens when they can no longer hold it in. That moment is much closer than they think. There is a specific point right before everything breaks where the mind goes completely silent. It is not a peaceful silence. It is not calm. It is a tense, suffocating stillness, as if something inside them has finally stopped pretending. That is when the truth rises to the surface. It is unfiltered, unprotected, and impossible to ignore. At this stage, they can no longer run. They have tried distance, they have tried distraction, and they have tried to convince themselves that what they feel is not real. But reality does not disappear just because it is inconvenient. What they feel for you has become an undeniable fact of their existence. Finally, they realize that this was never about controlling their feelings. It was always about confronting what those feelings reveal. What those feelings reveal is what terrifies them the most. You did not just make them fall in love. You exposed the part of them that has been starving for connection, for validation, and for something truly, undeniably real.